So what you do with this external analysis is ultimately you try to construct some forecasts about the way you think the world is moving that would then allow you to put that into your strategy planning. And I love Dilbert. And you see two uh, comics in the slide that are mocking the ability of people to do forecasts, and that's easy to do. You can find wrong forecasts all the time. And that's one of the challenges of um, forecasting is that it's hard and that you get it wrong. And so there's almost this continuum of, because they're often wrong, don't do them ever. What's the point? Just live in the moment. And the other end of that extreme is you keep studying and studying and studying and studying and studying because there's always something to know to get it right. So it's this desire for the perfect forecast that leads to paralysis by analysis because you can never reach any conclusions. And people fall various places along this continuum of why bother? Nobody's ever gets it right anyway, and oh, I've got to get it right, so all I ever do is study. It's easy to mock the forecasts, so I want to give you an example of how two companies made huge decisions that are still playing out in terms of whether who got it right, who got it wrong, just to let you know that sometimes forecasting makes a tremendous difference. And again, what the industry I know best is the aviation industry, so I'll give you an example from the aviation industry, and that is Boeing versus Airbus and the Super Jumbo. We now know the Super Jumbo is the A380 built by Airbus, the world's largest airplane, double-decker, an engineering marvel, not the most attractive airplane going, frankly, at least not to me, but nonetheless, this incredible airplane. Let me dial you back in history. The A380 was Airbus's one-upsmanship, if you will, to Boeing's 747. Cars I'm sorry, big airplanes are kind of like cars. The bigger they are, the more money the manufacturers tend to make per model. And so for years, Boeing had a monopoly on the big, long-range airplane market with its 747, and that made Boeing a lot of money. And Airbus looked at that and said, I want to get into that business. And so the next logical thing was to elevate the game and go bigger than the 747. Well, Boeing is looking at the same thing, but Boeing has two problems. First of all, do we cannibalize the sales on our own 747? And second, how big is that market anyway? There was so much uncertainty as to how much demand there would be for this Super Jumbo that for a while in the late 1990s, Boeing and Airbus actually discussed doing a joint venture, something we'll talk about later, but in a highly risky environment, this was a nice way to spread the risks and not kill yourself if you got it wrong. Well, really that was never going to happen because Boeing and Airbus are great rivals and they hate each other. There's no way they were going to cooperate. So that fell apart, and shortly thereafter, Airbus announced, we're going to do it. And now we have the A380. What's Boeing going to do? So Boeing is very much into the forecast business, talking to their customers, looking at the world markets, trying to figure out whether they needed to build a Super Jumbo 2. They knew it would hurt, if not kill, the sales of its 747. And they felt like that if they produced one too, they know that they're going to share sales with Airbus. No one airline or no one company ever dominates the other when they have competing products because they both build great products. So they knew they were going to split the market share, and Boeing increasingly just could not see the market for the super large jumbos. They're great on fuel efficiency if they're full. And there are markets clearly where this type of airplane works. The question was, were there enough markets demanding that many airframes? This is almost a bet the company decision for Boeing, because if Airbus is right and there's a large market for an airplane like the A380 and they hand it to Airbus, Boeing is going to take a long-term hit to its profitability. If, on the other hand, the market's not there and they build a competing airplane, they're both going to take a long-term hit to their profitability because they're going to both lose money on the program. After much study, Boeing concluded that they saw the market increasingly in what in the airline industry is called the long, thin markets. In other words, instead of flying from Los Angeles to Tokyo and then farming out to various cities across Japan, they saw that people wanted to be able to fly from San Diego, LA, San Jose, Portland, San Francisco, and Seattle to points all in Japan, and I'm just using that as an example. You could use many different nations as well. And those routes were best served by a very long range, but smaller and extremely fuel efficient twin engine design. And that is the 787. Now, the 787 has been pretty badly bloodied due to problems with its rollout and the 3-year delay. But you have to understand, when Boeing rolled this thing out and the airlines got a look at what it could do, it was the biggest seller ever. So here we are today, and how does it look? The 787 is a very strong seller. They forced Boeing to launch an airplane it didn't really want to launch, the A350, which is going to sell well. It's going to be a great airplane. And the A380 sales have been disappointing. Had Boeing launched into that market, it would have been disastrous for both. As it is, it's only slightly disastrous for Airbus. So it appears today that Boeing's forecasts were right and they made the right decision. But the nature of forecasts, sometimes you don't know for a long time whether you got it right or not. There may be some more strategic inflection points out there that will change this debate. But I wanted to tell you that long story just so you see you can't just cop out and say, don't bother forecasting, it's not going to work anyway. And certainly when you do the business strategy game, forecasting is going to be a big part of what drives your success. So I want to take a minute and talk about personally, how do you do this? Each of you are plotting your own careers. You need to be making forecasts about where the right places to be, what the right career paths, how should I go? And so here's my advice to you. You need to make sure you find 2 sources of information. One on the general environment. Personally, for me, that's the Wall Street Journal. I read the Wall Street Journal every day, and I feel like it gives me an excellent look at the broad economy. The second is something that's industry specific to the industry you want to work in. I get things on higher education through LinkedIn. I still love aviation, so for many years I read Aviation Week, although now I'm more into the general aviation segments. So I keep up with what's happening specifically in my industry of interest and also in the general economy, and that helps me make plans. For example, I believe that higher education is ripe for disruption, which is one of the reasons I was one of the first on this faculty to go to the hybrid teaching model, because I understand that there's more capability online and we're going to have to be ready to meet that threat. So this wraps up the general environment. Next up is Porter's 5 forces. See you then.